There's no need for fear.
Hey, what is going on, everybody, and welcome to Fantasia. For today, we're going to be jumping into another session of Epic 7 now today. Got another first impressions for you guys. That's right, jumping into this here, we are going to be taking a look at the one, the only Genesis Roz. It has been a long time coming, but the good news is that he is going to be obtainable absolutely free. And if you want to get the entire rundown of all the news that has come out about part 2 of the Epic 7 7th anniversary update, then do check out the upload that I had yesterday. I summarized everything from the VOD and the stream into a really short video that's easily digestible, right? So anyway, with Genesis Roz coming out and him being absolutely free, you wouldn't think that he is gonna be a monster, except he is. So let's jump right into it. Genesis Roz is gonna be a light Libra Knight, and he is being a 5-star version of essentially his other self, or Adventurer Roz. Now he is honestly, I think the only 5-star Libra Knight that we've ever seen in the game, so there is actually no unit that's really one-to-one comparable to this Roz here, but even so, he has really high HP, and we see he actually has pretty good defense as well. Pretty low speed, 99 speed here, and he does awaken a little bit into effect resistance, but none into crit rate or crit damage. With that being said, he has a team imprint for attack percent, and he has a self imprint for HP percent. Even though there is no 5-star that we can really compare him to, the good news is that we can compare him to some familiar faces, so you kind of get an idea of how bulky he might actually end up being. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is going to be a unit like Crimson Armin. Crimson Armin is also a light Libra Knight, but she is a 4-star, which means her base stats are going to be a little bit lower than what Roz's will be. But Crimson Armin is one example, and Arwell is actually another example. Both knights having had their place in the meta in the past, being very strong, very tanky units as well. Adventurer Roz is actually a Libra as well, but the problem with him is that the stats aren't really super comparable. He is a 3-star unit that got a specialty change, so he does have a skill tree that's bolstering a lot of the stat lines and stuff for himself, right? But the good news is that we can expect a really bulky, tanky, sustainable knight. The only issue is, we'll get to the stats later when we talk about his skills, it does seem like he might want some crit rate, but he doesn't awaken into any of it. But yeah, anyway, we'll come back here and try to experiment with some builds in a bit, but for right now, let's continue on with his preview so we can check out the skill kit that's going to be revealed. So Genesis Roz here, again, he has no effectiveness, no effect resistance, just a little bit of effect res in the Awakening. It's not necessarily going to be super important though, as you'll see, he's a bit more of an offensive unit. So jumping into his skills, his skill 3, Goddess's Judgment. Roz will attack all enemies with divinity and penetrates the target's defense. Damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's max health. Damage dealt increases with fewer enemies. And at the start of the first battle, grants Sacred Covenant for 5 turns. Sacred Covenant is an undispellable buff that allows Roz to not be affected by any debuffs or some harmful effects, and upon dying, he will revive with 100% health. So essentially, what this buff is it took in Dragon Bride Senya's ability, right, where she's unaffected by any debuffs and some harmful effects, and it's combining that with Ruel's ability to just essentially revive herself upon death. Except this is even better because Ruel doesn't even revive herself with 100% health. So he's going to come back with 100% HP, and he's just absolutely unaffected by debuffs for 5 turns. That is absolutely insane. The amount of defense penetration and stuff, we'll see. It's an AoE attack, so it is definitely going to hurt quite a bit, and the fact that you can just build him with a ton of HP, he has really high base HP and base defense, and he self-imprints to HP as well, means that he will be dealing quite a bit of damage. And with the damage being dealt with fewer enemies, shows that this is actually a low cooldown skill, as we can see here. 4 cooldowns for his skill, no way to reduce it through the skill enhancements. But yeah, that's not too bad in terms of turn cycling here, especially with so many support units that you can use to kind of push him up and cycle him regardless. So either way, because he gets a revive, there's really no way that you can essentially dodge the Raz unless you somehow finish him off twice, kind of like how you deal with an Arbiter Vildred, right? So we're gonna see here, Raz's animation looks absolutely beautiful, and he's gonna come in and just look at those damage numbers. Let me go back here so you guys can see. The damage numbers are actually quite good. Now, he's not hitting everybody for a whole ton here, but that one unit here in the front taking 16k damage, that is pretty strong. Alright, so I think the frontline unit was probably a knight or something mitigating damage, but either way, you saw that heart debuff, right? That was on that frontline unit, and it's called Disintegration. So let's jump into skill number 2. Skill 2 is Chains of Binding. After inflicting Seal and Disintegration on the enemy for 2 turns, attacks the enemy. A critical hit will grant an extra turn. Damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's max health. So what this essentially allows you to do is you will, with Disintegration, you can decrease the max health of your target by 25%, and this effect is doubled when applied to heroes. This is kind of crazy because this Disintegration skill, because it's saying that it will double the effect when applying to heroes, it's implying that you will get this effect in PvE modes, unless of course they retroactively go back and put that bosses are immune to Disintegration, but even then, this is kind of crazy, right? So you're essentially decreasing the max health of a unit in RTA, Arena, Guild Wars, whatever, by 50%. You're cutting half of their max health away. So if they're a 40k HP Dragonbite Senya, 20k HP now, right? If it was a 10k HP unit, 5k HP now, making them a lot easier to deal with, especially tanky knights, right? Especially those tanky builds that are floating out there. Not only that though, you get to inflict Seal beforehand, and it also gets to ignore resistance just with 10 souls being used. So this is actually nuts. You're also going to notice that there is no decreased skill cooldown on this skill too, and it's only a 3-turn skill cooldown, which means you can get this pretty quickly. The reason why is because when you get the critical hit and you grant the extra turn, it's essentially reducing all your turn cooldowns by 1, including his S3. So if you were able to S3 with Raz and then S2, you essentially have like a 2-turn cooldown on your S3, right? You're gonna get it back really, really quickly. So I don't think Raz's S3 is gonna hit like a Straze, for example, just like one-shotting tanks out there, but coupled with this S2, I think you can deal a ton of damage, especially if you start with the S2, decrease someone's health, and then go in for the S3, penetrate their defense, and then finish them off that way. So that's actually kind of scary. And keep in mind that by decreasing an opponent's max health here, you're also decreasing the amount of damage that they do if they're an HP scaling unit. So look at this, going into the Empyrean Ilanov right there, right? You don't see the max health fully decrease, but he does actually decrease the max health, and you see how taking just 2,000 damage there takes a good chunk of her HP away. She lost about 20% of her health, right? So that's actually kind of crazy. So this kind of means that this Ilanov was probably like a 24k health, 25k health Ilanov here, and by cutting it in half and then taking away just this percent here, you know, Disintegration is putting in a lot of work. Now, going to his skill 1, it's called Holy Blade, where Raz will attack the enemy with a sword blast and increases combat readiness of the caster by 25%. Damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's max health. Okay, so Holy Blade is actually really strong. Normally, you'll see when people S1, they're going to increase their own combat readiness by 10 to 15%, usually 10%, and if you get enhancements and stuff, it'll go up to 15%. Here, all of Raz's skill enhancements are damage increases, right? So they're giving you his full effect, even without using any Molagoras, which is amazing. But the 25% combat readiness, just so you know how annoying that is, Boss Arunka, whenever you hit her, she gains 25% combat readiness. It is a lot, right? 25% is a huge push. It means that Raz is able to turn cycle himself really quickly. There's Upsides and downsides though. The upside is you're going to turn cycle yourself quite quickly, and you're going to be able to cycle your S2 and S3. The downside is that you're also going to turn cycle out of your immune to debuffs buff, right? The Covenant buff there. So it is like kind of a double-edged sword, but even then I think Roz is a very solid unit in terms of his kit. Okay, next up, let's go ahead and take a look at his artifact, because yes, we are going to be able to get his artifact for free as well, through all the missions and stuff that you'll use to acquire Genesis Roz. So his artifact is a night exclusive. It's called a Precious Connection. And what it does is it increases your max health by 10%. This is not increasing your base health, by the way. Whenever artifacts say they increase HP, they talk about your final HP. So let's say you have a 30,000 HP Roz. Taking 10% of that, that's an extra 3,000 HP, right? So you're just going to get a 3,000 bonus HP slapped on top of him, which is going to be absolutely amazing, okay? Now, at the start of the turn, he will grant 10 souls to the team, which is fantastic because his S2 only requires 10 souls to ignore effect resistance. And not only that, this is a unique effect where we've only really seen this once before, which is here, and it's that you can activate this twice per battle. Okay, so at the start of your turn for Roz, you get 10 souls, and at the next start of your turn, you'll also get another 10 souls. So essentially, if you start with Roz, you can soul burn his S2, ignore res, take an extra turn, and you'll have another 10 souls at the start of your turn, and then you rip your S3, right? So it sets up for a unit that might come after him, which is really nice. And it says the skill effect of this artifact does not increase when enhanced. They talk about these effects over here, but yeah, by getting it to plus 30, you can still get this extra, like essentially 1,000 HP from the artifact, and an extra like 100 attack as well. So you'll at least get those stat lines that'll increase, but it just won't increase the actual effects here. But that is really cool to see. So Roz's artifact is, I think, going to be one of the best like night artifacts out there, just because it increases this HP by so much, and by granting souls. You can definitely see this artifact going on Dragon Bride Senyas and a whole ton of other knights that are out there, making them a lot more annoying. But we see Genesis Roz in his beautiful animations going to be blessing us very, very soon. Again, you don't have to summon for him. He is gonna be free, and you just have to clear the mission Divinity Recovered, which is going to be a series of missions that are going to be available to everybody after clearing the 6th world episode, right? So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at Genesis Roz builds, and also see what artifacts besides his own would be pretty decent for him depending on your strategies. Since we were just on the topic of artifacts, I think it's appropriate that we talk about some alternatives in case you don't want to use Roz's own artifact on himself, which is very fair. The artifact that Roz has would give him an extra 10% HP, which is really useful, but it's also really useful in other units too. And he doesn't necessarily need the soul burn either on his S2, it really depends, but if you want to seal and you want to get that disintegrate, it's probably the best idea to have some souls on the team. It's a really good artifact to have, but it can be used again on other units. So let's say you're prioritizing damage. Well, if you're prioritizing damage, going for something like 3F is actually probably still one of the best night artifacts in the entire game, because you have a 100% chance to inflict additional damage proportional to the caster's max HP on the target. So if you have a Roz that's 25 to 30k health, and you're ripping an AoE S3, you're coming up with an S2 that grants you an extra turn, and then you can S1 again, like you're turn cycling a lot, you're hitting your opponent a lot, you're going to do a lot of chip damage with this, and it can really stack up in the long run, right? So this is still a really strong contender for an artifact to use on him. Now if you missed the Overlord collaboration, you don't have 3F, there are some other options available. If you were to run a counter build, right, let's say you're running Roz on counter, you can also slap Elber's Ritual Sword on him to just take advantage of that turn, that S1 turn cycling. Again, the downside of turn cycling too quickly with Roz is that while you're decreasing the cooldowns on your S2 and S3, you're also decreasing the cooldown, the buff duration of your unique buff that allows you to be completely resistant, immune to essentially all debuffs out there and some harmful effects, right? So do keep that in mind. A thing that I think might be really cool is the new set that's going to be released, that one that lets you gain 50% combat readiness when you revive. It also has a plus 15% speed. The speed set normally would give you 25% extra speed of your base speed, but the new set will give you 15%. So it's not a huge drop off, right? You're losing about 10% speed to gain 50% combat readiness anytime you revive. Now it is situational because reviving is kind of a niche thing, but Roz's unique buff does allow him to revive, and if he revives and gains that 50% combat readiness, it can allow him to clutch matches that he normally wouldn't be able to. Now the main thing with Holy Sacrifice here is that hopefully they won't conflict with each other, where the passive and Holy Sacrifice try to proc at the same time. That would be really bad, but if they did proc separately, let's say Roz's passive procs first, he'll revive, he has the 100% HP, he'll gain the 50% combat readiness from that new set. Let's say he cuts and takes a turn and does all that stuff, and then your opponent ends up finishing him off a few turns later, and he comes back with a Holy Sacrifice. I think that is incredible staying power for a unit, especially if you're already bringing healers and damage mitigation, other forms of sustain on your team like barriers. I think it could be very, very powerful, and really annoying too if your opponent's not bringing any like revive blockers, right? This on top of units like Spirit Eye Selene, Blood Moon Haste, and other units like Ruel that can just revive him directly. I think you're going to see a very strong unit that's just going to keep coming back and back and back, just like he does in the lore. And aside from those three artifacts, everything else really just depends on what you need and what you want to go for. Obviously, if you're running like random PvE stuff and you just want some damage mitigation, you can go for Aureus or Adamant Shield, but he's not a real defensive knight. He looks more to be like an offensive knight, but other defensive options you can bring for utility for your team in case he is like a really good high HP unit for you to use is Bastion of Pelusia. He grants immunity to himself, and ally in the back line, also they get a giant barrier, and because he's supposed to scale with max HP, you can build it with higher HP and he will be able to grant a larger barrier there. But other than that, I don't really think there's too many other options to go for. There are weird things like Wings of Light and Shadow if you need some extra crit rate and you want to deal some extra damage, but it is not that great overall compared to other things that you can go for. I think I'd rather just use his own artifact over something like this. And I believe there is another artifact up here, which I'm just going to mention really briefly. It also, yeah, Broken Will of the Priest, right? You get some extra hit chance with this, which is really nice to have, but the problem with this is that you don't really need the extra defense penetration because he already fully penetrates defense with his S3, so it's kind of a waste on him, unfortunately. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a bad option, especially if you're having difficulty hitting evasion units and such. So let's go ahead and continue on with some sets and recommendations for how to run him. Obviously, when it comes to knights and stuff, when it comes to damage in particular, running things like Destruction Set is always really good if you want the extra crit damage and you want the extra oomph behind your attacks. And Roz, all of his attacks for his S1, S2, and S3 seem to hit decently hard, at least in the showcases there. His S3 doesn't seem like it's an absolute like one shot like stuff like Straze would pull out, but I think Destruction Set could still be usable. Speed Set is also pretty nice if you want some extra speed to your Roz. Again, if you want to compromise with this, you want a little bit of speed, you can also use that new set that's going to be released as well, so that can be something that you want to farm for, especially if you want to abuse Revives with a Holy Sacrifice. I think that could be really funny and kind of meme, right? When it comes to sets though, 2-piece sets, when it comes to 4-piece sets, you can also, I mentioned counter set with like Elber's Ritual Sword. I don't think that's really going to be something that catches on though, so do keep that in mind. When it comes to 2-piece sets that you can use to either fill out these 4-piece sets, or you can run like multiple of these, is obviously HP set. You can stack a bunch of HP sets together along with crit sets. You can stack HP and crit sets together to max out your crit rate while also having a higher amount of HP on your Roz. It could be pretty good, right? He doesn't need things like immunity because he's already immune to buffs or debuffs with his unique effect, but you could potentially run Torrent Set if you really want some more damage. I know this decreases your max health, but some people have really insane torrent pieces that are out there. You've seen Dragon Bride Senyas on torrent sets that still have like 35k plus HP, and they hit like an absolute truck. Yeah, it's because the torrent set right here that could potentially help out too. So those are a few options that you can go for here in terms of two-piece sets. Again, remember, you can stack these as well, so you can potentially go torrent, crit, and HP. You can go triple HP, you can go triple crit set. It really depends on what you need at the moment and what you have laying around, but this might give you an idea of certain things that you might want to be looking for when you're farming your current Rift or your hunts right now in preparation for the Raws. And of course, what's a first impressions video without trying to theory craft a build, because that's the best part of this game after all, in my opinion at the very least. This is something that I threw together, kind of came up with. The stat values will look a lot better when it's actually on a 5-star unit though. I'm using Crimson Armin as a base because she shares the same star signs. She's just a 4-star unit. There's no EEs or anything else that are attached with her. So this is actually a pretty good glimpse into what you can kind of expect to see when you use Genesis Raws. I'm currently on a Destruction and HP set here, and I am using a critical hit chance necklace, mostly because the fact that he has absolutely 0 crit chance awakenings, and if you want that crit rate, you're going to need some crit damage for his damage output, right? I don't believe he's going to do too well without any crit damage, but that is something we have to see when we see the multipliers on him and how that plays out. But yeah, with 26k health, keep in mind that if you're running his artifact, you get about 10% extra HP, so assuming these were the final stats on an actual 5-star unit, you'll get 2,600 additional HP here, which means this Roz is going to be sitting at 29,000 HP, which is about the HP that we saw in the actual preview, right? So this is going to be kind of cool. You do have kind of middling speed here because we don't really have a speed set or anything going on. I chose to go for Destruction because it gives us a bit more value. You can run a crit chance necklace while also having some decent, respectable amounts of crit damage here. My crit rate is not full, but I could technically mod out either the defense here or some flat HP here to bring him up to 100% chance, right? But this is just an example of what you could potentially be doing. A lot of these pieces I'll show you real quick, mostly just concentrate their substats onto HP. That's what you really want here. And if you're running a crit chance necklace, then all you have to do is concentrate some of your stats here, like I can mod out some of the flat health for maybe some crit damage and stuff to increase his damage output, get some crit rate here to get 100% crit chance, right? Maybe if you want to, you modify that defense out as well if you need so. I don't believe there's any other stats that we would need here, but yeah, overall this is the kind of direction that I went with the build. But again, please wait and see when the damage multipliers and stuff come out, when we can actually test his damage numbers in game before we make any final decisions on what type of build he should be on. So last but not least, let's go ahead and talk about some theoretical team compositions that you can use him in. Obviously, we won't really know how he's going to play out. It's kind of a unique unit that is being released here, so we won't know until he actually gets tested out in arena and such, but I can confidently say that he is actually going to be a pretty decent anchor for potential aggressive or cleave teams, right? He has a good source of damage output. He can easily shred through specific knights and such. The seal, the disintegrate, they're all really good skills, so what better unit to bring him into than Ahmed teams, right? You can run Ahmed, you can run really fast DPSs and burst damage stuff and have things that are relatively lower on HP, and then you can have Raz come in and do the cleanup work. You don't even need a super fast Raz to get that done either, and he does also bring souls to the table as well if you build him slightly a bit faster, right? We'll see how that kind of plays out. I feel like Raz is going to be a bit of a slower build, but even then, people used to use Blood Moon Haste, Dragon Bride Senya as anchors for these types of really fast teams. Right now, I think Abyssal Yufine is one of the main units that people are using as anchors for Ahmed cleaves, but you can definitely use him in any sort of fast aggressive team as an anchor. And if you're not sure what an anchor is usually a unit that's relatively tanky, that's normally relatively self-sufficient, right? Let's say Blood Moon Haste, for example, and if you're running a really quick and aggressive team with a lot of squishy units and they all end up dying, then your anchor, the unit that's a bit bulkier, that's usually going to be the last one standing, can usually either 1, clean things up, or 2, swing things back into your favor, right? Blood Moon Haste, for example, gets to nuke something for free and then just kind of bring back your entire team with a revive. So that is something that Roz could potentially do, right? Especially with his built-in revive. Even if they try to finish him off with the rest of your team, he's going to come back. If you're on that revive set and you gain that 50% combat readiness, hopefully your opponent's already weak from all of your other DPSs going, and then you just come in and finish everybody off with an S3. Could be great, but again, need some testing. He'll obviously also work really well with other knights and tanks and such. You can bring him with things like Bossa Runka to protect him, Empyrean Ilanov, standard knight affairs, right? You can also actually kind of couple him up with either Blood Moon Haste or potentially something like Revel of Light. These units are really great for healing, keeping him alive, and sustaining your team for the long run. Especially in those fights where it's more bruiser versus bruiser battles. Yeah, having units that can potentially buff your defenses, for example, bringing something like an Ice Crow here with a defense buff for your entire team could potentially be pretty good. Coupling him with other knights that are other tankier warriors and such that have self-sustain or ways to kind of deal damage, something like a Charles, for example, being able to buff the attack and defense of everybody on the team, and Charles being a pretty decent unit to push himself up with the turn cycling, pushing everybody up with turn cycling actually. His S2 here, right, increasing combat readiness by 15%, will work really well with Roz. Dual attacking with Roz is also going to be a fantastic option. You can definitely give him more undispellable buffs, things like Conqueror Lilius, for example, with the Vigor buff on her S3. You can definitely come in with Sea Phantom Politis with the Rage buff, giving some extra speed and some extra attack as well. Those are all pretty decent, and obviously Empyrean Ilanov with the Indomitable buff and the extra effect resistance and defense that comes along with that is also pretty good for sustain. But yeah, Roz I think is going to be a very versatile unit. They designed him, I think, in a pretty unique way, but also in a really clever way that allows newer players to kind of take advantage of him, but at the same time, they're also going to be allowing veteran players to get some use out of him as well. I think he's going to be pretty decent in PvP. Is he going to be a must ban all the time everywhere? I actually don't think so, but I think his impact on the first couple of weeks on his release is going to be pretty major, as everybody is going to be trying to test him out as soon as possible once they acquire him through the missions. Anyway, with that being said though guys, thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video and you found it helpful, consider leaving a like and subscribe for more Epic 7 content. And until next time, take care.